serving in the Falklands, Bosnia, Kosovo. For the last 10 years, he's worked for the NHS Ambulance Service. He lived across the county in Ellesmere, Oswestry and Market Drayton, where he joined the Town Council in 2007 and twice served as Mayor here. He also served as Chairman of the Shropshire Association of Councils, which is based in Wem, and is a keen rugby union supporter and played for Oswestry and the Army Sevens. So Mark, would you like 2 minutes to say your opinion, please?
Are you going to read out question 1, or do you want me to?
No, I'll talk about yourself.
Talking about
And your
myself,
policy,
okay.
your views.
Well, my views are, I was Conservative, as many people here know, so there's nobody hiding now. I moved over, I resigned because of what I do at Patsy. You stand by what you believe in, and the morals that you have, and I thought it was wrong, so I resigned. I stand for reform because I think it's the correct party. It was the only party that can change it.
Can't hear.
Yeah, and sorry, and I think it's the only party that will change it. I look forward to working here. I know a lot about Shropshire. I've been here for nearly 40 years with service abroad and to be complete with the armed forces, of course. Many people know me here. I've done many projects, start to finish, around the town and around the county as well. So I look forward to helping you and look forward to your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Helen Morgan there is seeking re-election for the Liberal Democrats. Helen lives with her family in Harmer Hill and worked as the financial controller of a local company before being elected as MP for North Shropshire in December 2021. Now, during her time in Parliament, Helen has proposed several new laws, including a bus bill that will ensure that towns like Market Drayton have the routes people need to access hospitals, high streets and neighbourhood towns. She's campaigned for improved broadband and mobile signals, tabling a rural roaming law that would force local phone operators to share signals in areas where coverage is poor. Recent work here in Market Drayton includes supporting the Save Dams of Wood campaign and obliging the council to commit to improving the outdated Greenfields slaughter facilities. So Helen Morgan, please, your turn now.
Thank you very much. So my name's Helen Morgan. I am the Liberal Democrat candidate for North Shropshire, and it has been the privilege of a lifetime to serve as the MP here since December 2021 up until the dissolution of Parliament on the 30th of May this year. I focused in that time on the things that really matter to people in North Shropshire, things that people have told me are their priorities. So, for instance, focusing on the NHS, the appalling waits people have for an ambulance and the issues that we face in A&E, and had some success there, securing £21 million for the Shrewsbury Town Hospital Trust to install 52 extra beds to try and ease flow through the hospital. I focused in on the cost of living crisis. Lots of people here in North Shropshire are off-grid, and running a campaign with my colleagues managed to secure alternative fuel payments for people during the cost of living crisis. And we've also had some success with getting help for people in park homes as well. And I've also focused on public transport, successfully finding out that we were going to get funding for step-free access at Whitchurch Station just the other week, and supporting the campaign for a restored railway at Oswestry. There is so much more to do. There are so many issues in Shropshire that need to be dealt with. In Market Drayton, we need better public transport as a priority, more access to GPs and dentists, and better mobile signal. When I was elected, it was the first time in almost 200 years that North Shropshire had an MP who wasn't a Conservative. I would urge you not to go back to that, to go to stick with somebody with a record of working hard and not taking our voters for granted.
Thank you very much indeed. So Natalie Brownlee is fighting the seat for the Labour Party. Natalie is in North Shropshire with her family. She's a parish councillor, a volunteer in girls' football, helps the youth club, and is also a full-time care worker. She grew up on a council estate where she says life was tough and we dealt with the same struggles that families are facing today. She says she knows what it's like not to have enough money for electric, food and bills. Most recently, she successfully completed a 3-year community project in combination with Shropshire Council and Openreach to bring superfast broadband to homes locally, which means that families can work from home more easily, apply for jobs and take part in interviews, and children can access their homework. Natalie, off you go.
to Riley, your Labour candidate. As you've just heard, I grew up on a council estate and it was a struggle and times were tough. But that tough start in life has given me a drive and determination to want to make a difference in our communities and to do right by the people who live here. I'm a massive football fan. I still play and I help coach girls football in Oswestry. I'm also a season ticket holder at Wrexham AFC, long before the Hollywood takeover, as I was a member of the Community Trust when it fell on hard times. I've lived near Oswestry since 2009 with my family and I love living here. It's such a beautiful part of Shropshire. But so many times people tell me that they're struggling. Nothing works as it should anymore. The police struggle to tackle antisocial behaviour. Long hospital waits means that people are in pain, going into debt to go private. Our kids are being robbed of opportunities and buses don't go where you need them to. This is our community's future and the status quo isn't good enough. I want better for our area. I'm already working hard for my community in St Martin's, as was outlined in the opening speech. I'm raising the issues around children travelling to school so they can do it safely. So why am I standing as a Labour MP? Well, 14 years ago, our country was steered into austerity. Massive cuts, public services don't work, and we're all poorer because of it. And the two parties who did that to the country are the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. And I feel...
A few moments left.
Oh, sorry, I thought we had 3 minutes.
2 minutes.
Oh, right, okay. The two parties who did that to the country were the Lib Dems and the Conservatives, and I feel strongly about this because my children have only ever known a Lib Dem and or Tory government.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll stop you there. You'll have a chance to speak on later on. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. So Craig Emery with the green rosette is standing for the Green Party. Craig has lived in North Shropshire all his life and resides here with his wife Kate and his daughter Alice. Craig has worked within food retail for over 20 years and is currently area manager for the Co-op. And Craig has a stoma and is a strong advocate of disability rights within North Shropshire. He's recently taken part in a campaign with Colostomy UK to raise national awareness. His CV includes 11 years as parish councillor at Snattin and Gabowen. He currently chairs the Finance and Executive Committee, chairman of Gabowen Community Group, a parent governor at Gabowen Primary School, independent director of Derwin College Counselling, a not-for-profit organisation linked to Derwin Specialist College in North Shropshire, and is also a Neighbourhood Watch coordinator. Craig, off you go.
Brilliant, thank you. That's kind of stolen half of my intro, but so yeah, look, that's me. I think the bit that I wanted to get across that a lot of people often ask me is kind of why vote Green, and surprisingly my answer is usually well why not? We know the Green Party has always been trusted around our climate and environmental policies, and I think the first kind of couple of weeks of these campaign, the TV debates have really highlighted the strength in our other policies and how they really resonate with people across North Shropshire and indeed the UK. Things like making sure the NHS isn't privatised, making sure that the super rich pay their way and tax them, and really invest in our local services. I think, if I'm honest, do I expect the next government to be green? No. But I think what the Green Party are really aiming to do is make sure we've got a really good amount of Green MPs to really push the next government to be bolder and braver, especially around their climate commitments, where we've seen pretty much every other party row back on their commitments to the climate. And to really make sure that all of the parties, whoever's in government, doesn't row back on those U-turns and stick to what they're saying in their manifestos.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. A chap who drew the last ballot place is Simon Bates, who's your Conservative candidate. Simon Baines, we call him Simon Baines. Simon Baines and his wife Maggie live in the village of Hordley near Ellesmere. He grew up on the Welsh borders where his father ran the Lake Burnley Hotel, and he went to school in Shrewsbury. After studying history in Cambridge, he worked in business and finance for 25 years before running his own bookshop business in Shrewsbury and writing 2 books. I must also add that in the most recent Parliament he was MP for was Clwyd South. His CV includes Chairman of the Welsh Historic Gardens Trust, Chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Woods and Trees, founding Chairman of the Holroyd Community Theatre in the Oswestry, and Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Right Honourable Lucy Fraser MP, the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. So Simon Baines.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for everybody attending today. As has been explained, I live in Hordley. In fact, I live on a farm, and one of the issues I think that is most important in this constituency is making sure that our farmers can get on and produce the food that we need and look after our countryside. So that is one of the major areas that I'm campaigning on in this general election. And as was mentioned, I was the MP for Clwyd South. The seat was dissolved under the boundary changes. As you know, the seat borders the north of Shropshire. So I then put my name forward to stand here in Shropshire, given my long-standing connections, not least also that my children went to school in North Shropshire itself. And my business experience, I think, is very helpful in terms of being a Member of Parliament, both in the financial world and running a small business as well. And during my time as the MP for Clwyd South, the 2 things I'm most proud of, one was saving some woodlands from vandalism, and secondly, bringing £15 million worth of investment into the area. I've also had extensive experience in voluntary and community activity. I set up a charity with my wife Maggie called Concertina, which provides music for the elderly in care homes and day centres. And as was mentioned, I was chairman of the Holroyd Community Theatre near Oswestry, which I helped raise the money for and was the founding chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Now there is one more candidate. Samuel Claddingbull is standing as an independent, but has not responded to the organisers' invitation to join us tonight. I just need to establish whether or not Samuel is actually present. If you are present, Samuel, could you raise your hand, please? No, we all think he's doing his A-levels, so he's having a worse night than we are. So question, we have four questions from the 2 organising bodies, and I'll read out the question and turn to each of the speakers in turn to answer. Climate change is affecting us now and threatens far-reaching consequences in the future. Polls say that policies on climate and environment are important to 71% of North Shropshire voters. Currently, many thousand North Shropshire homes need upgraded insulation to stay warm and cut costs, and households simply can't afford to switch to clean energy sources, and the lack of public transport ties people to burning petrol. So what are your party's policies in terms of reaching net zero, and what is your personal view on the issue? So Mark, over to you.
First of all, we can't stop climate change. We can slow it down, but in reality, the hard truth is we can't stop it. So to slow it down, what Reform are looking to do is to take over most of the power producing companies, so hopefully take over at least 50% of them. In that so doing, we will bring down the prices dramatically of the very fuel you need to use to heat your home and to keep your family warm. That will take time, but not long, because once the rules are made, as we know, Parliament moves very fast. Well, it will do in Reform's hands anyway, as Mr Farage has told us. Next is the transportation. We know also that Shropshire is one of the largest landlocked counties in Britain, if not the only one. What it is we find electric power for cars difficult here because of the expanse of the county. But we still need an infrastructure. That infrastructure needs to be built, and we need to look into that and get that done. But we're never going to be totally electric cars. The reality is it's not going to happen, I don't think. I think it's a joint power, multi-fuel, electric and petrol or diesel, whichever mix it is. That way, in Shropshire, at least you can get to where you want to go to and get back home, because there's nothing worse than getting stuck in Shropshire. So bringing the prices down for the average person, that's very, very important, because most people in Shropshire are on minimum wages, which is only like £12,500 where they're taxed on. But minimum wage puts them up to 20, so they're taxed on 12.5. No, they have to be taxed on the first 20 they earn. So most minimum wage people shouldn't or won't be taxed under the reform. That will happen in the first 100 days. So that'll put the average of £1,500 to £2,000 back in their pockets, and that will also help the payment of their costs.
Reading your manifesto, I think you call it your contract this afternoon, there's little mention of net zero in your ambitions. In fact, I think Nigel Farage has said you have no ambitions to achieve net zero.
I don't think he does have. I'm not speaking of getting net zero, because I think it's an impossibility. The reality of life is, our leader, Mr. Farage, actually tells the truth. And if it's impossible to do, why tell people you can do it? We can't get net zero, but we can try to get there. We can try it, we won't reach it, but we can help it.
So have you got a map how you might get towards it?
We start slowly by taking over power stations, stopping farmers mainly by going to electronic, what's they called? Solar panels across the fields. Put it back to farming. Put British food where British food should be. That's farmed on the land. Give them the grants they need to do that. Make sure that continental companies, as in up the road, don't charge farmers a very small amount for milk that it costs more to produce. So a large company from the continental comes over here, buys the dairies, owns the producer, and then robs the farmers. That should not be done. It should not be possible. And with reform, we will reform that, because that's what the name is.
Thank you. Helen.
So I think I probably disagree strongly with some of that. Reaching net zero is achievable, and it is also important, and our policy aims for 2045 in line with, in fact ahead of our commitments under the Paris Agreement. But what does it mean for real people every day who live in a damp and mouldy home? We've had an enormous amount of casework in my office on that, and for people who can't get about to do all the things they need to do because they don't have access to a car. For me, we need to be insulating homes so that people use less energy to start off with and live a warm, comfortable and cheaper life, which is really important. And we need to sort out transport so that people can use a cost-effective and reliable public transport system and be less reliant on their car. And that will help out all those people who can't access a car anyway. That's why I've run a bus services bill campaign to highlight the importance of rural public transport, and insulation of homes is a key point in our manifesto. I just want to touch on energy security as well. We're proud of our record in coalition that we quadrupled, I think might be wrong, tripled offshore energy production, and really took us a long way down the road to renewable energy production. And renewables are much cheaper than other alternative fuels, and they are much more secure. We're not dependent on murderous dictators across the world for setting the price of fossil fuels. So it's important for us every day to cut the cost of living, and it's important for energy security, and it's important to get people around. So renewables, public transport, insulating homes, they would be my top priorities for reaching net zero.
If it's important, why do we have to wait till 2045? That's your ambition for your party.
Well, we just lost 5 years under this current government, where they've backtracked on all of their commitments to improve the situation regarding net zero. So we have to be realistic about when we can achieve it. Obviously, we'd like to achieve it by 2030, but it is 2024, and we're not there yet. We don't have the grid capacity to move people onto electric cars. We don't have the infrastructure in place that we need to do it. We have to be realistic about what can be achieved.
All right, thank you. Natalie.
I, like most of you, are concerned about climate change and how it's affecting us now. And one of Labour's first steps for change is switching on GB energy. And that will create a new publicly owned company so that we can invest in clean energy and achieve zero carbon electricity by 2030. On the issue with buses, there's a lot of red tape with local councils that Labour has a policy to remove, so that we, the community, can have a system in place where we commission the buses that we need. In Shropshire, all buses seem to lead to Shrewsbury, which doesn't work for us when we need to go from Market Drayton to Whitchurch, or Whitchurch to Ellesmere. So that would be a policy that I would work closely with Shropshire Council in taking back control of our buses. I'm one of the many people who live in a cold house that is EPC rated over C. We have single brick, and trying to get funding with the Conservative government to insulate our home is shocking. Companies don't want to work with the programme because they're worried that they won't get the funding from the current government. Labour has a Labour Warm Homes plan that will roll out a national programme, a credible plan to insulate our homes nationally.
The Liberal Democrats reckon they can do by 2045. Labour say 2050.
Yeah, net zero by 2050.
Why are you slower than the Liberal Democrats?
Pardon?
Why are you slower than the Liberal Democrats?
I think it's about having a realistic approach and not promising something that we can't achieve. 2050 is Labour's plan to get us to net zero.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Craig, on for you, I think.
Brilliant, thank you, no pressure there. So I think just to put a really clear fact out there, so the Climate Change Committee were really clear that 2023 was the warmest globally, and 77 countries set monthly records for how hot it was in their country. So climate change is here, it's very real. We've been really clear in our manifesto that we will transition to net zero as soon as possible, but before 2040. And it's very, very clear on that. For us, the cost of doing nothing or dragging our heels is going to be far outweighed by the effects of climate change. So, you know, throughout the manifesto, all of our policies are intertwined with reaching that net zero as soon as possible. So some of the things around achieving 70% of wind electricity generation through wind by 2030, the investment in energy storage and making the distribution system far more efficient, removing oil and gas subsidies, which we know to those big businesses which are just generating hundreds of millions of pounds worth of profit for shareholders. We would stop new fossil fuel extractions in the UK, and things like for house buildings, we would make sure every house was insulated up to EPC-B grading, and making sure all new builds achieve the passive house or better. I think, you know, for me personally, especially locally to Shropshire, I think it's worth making sure that zero carbon Shropshire's plans are really fully implemented. They're really clear. There's a plan there. Don't need to do anything, you know, different to that. So making sure that we install 5,000 to 10,000 domestic solar systems across houses. Making sure we support those operators in making the grid investments as well. So look, there's loads and loads. I could go through the whole manifesto, but it is all intertwined in making sure we deliver net zero as quickly as possible.
Assuming, if I may, you don't end up being the winning party in this election, what can you actually do physically and practically to get things moving along?
Look, I think that's what, you know, I spoke about at the start. We are clear that probably we won't form the next government, and having a Green in the room is really important to hold those in government to push them to be a lot bolder and a lot braver. We've already seen several of the parties that have backtracked. Where, you know, I think it was 28 billion that the Labour Party had said that they were going to invest. That's down to 8 billion. The Conservatives under David Cameron cancelled or made it difficult for wind power to be built. You know, everyone just seems to be kicking the can down the road, and you need that voice in the corner to chip away to say, no, you can't keep doing this. I don't want to get to a stage where I can say, I told you so, because when we get to that stage, the world won't be worth saving, unfortunately.
All right, great, thank you very much. Simon Baines.
Yes, thank you very much. The first point I'd like to make is to answer the second part of the question, which is, what is your personal view on the issue? Well, like I think everybody else here on the panel, I feel that the climate change is clearly a key priority for us and will be in the next government. And from a personal point of view, some of the ways that I've tried to contribute to it in terms of the debate is I back the local electricity bill in Parliament. I've championed hydropower. This perhaps is because I grew up at Lake Vyrnwy, where there's a massive dam, and actually the whole valley had its electricity generated by hydropower through the dam, and I think there are many ways in which we could use hydropower more. And then another example is, as was mentioned earlier on, I was chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Woods and Trees, and the woods and trees play a very important part in combating climate change. I think the first point I'd like to make in terms of the other part of the question, which is what are our policies to reach net zero, is we need to keep things in perspective. The UK represents 1% of the world's carbon emissions. The main problem lies in China and India. So I think, and this comes into the second question, that an international approach is very important. I think the other point is that we should be very proud of what we've achieved already. And here are a few statistics. 40% of our electricity comes from renewables, compared to 7% in 2010. We've seen a 52% reduction in carbon emissions since 1990, and we've had the fastest reduction since 2010 of any G20 country. And the UK has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by more than the US, Canada, France, Italy and Japan between 1990 and 2023, and we're also home to the 5 largest offshore wind farms in the world. So we have made big strides, but clearly there is more to do. I agree with Natalie. I think that the 2050 is a realistic target. To reach net zero is extremely expensive, as has been touched upon. And it's not just expensive for the government, it's actually expensive for people like us. And given that 1/3 of homes in Shropshire are off the mains gas, it gives you some idea of the many changes that would have to be made to reach net zero. So what we've been suggesting as a government is that we actually, in terms of, for instance, the oncome of electric cars, we just move to what the rest of Europe are doing by moving the deadline to 2035 compared to 2030. So our aim remains the same, to reach 2050 net zero, but we need to do it in a way that brings people with us and is realistic. And the other point I'd like to make is that net zero is, as the name suggests, net zero. It's not gross zero. So there will be some degree of fossil fuels and gas involved in it. And we have legislated to ensure licensing rounds for oil and gas production in the North Sea to continue, because we will have to use that source of power for some time to come. And we would rather it came from within the UK than that it had to be imported at great expense and creation of more carbon emissions from abroad. So I think net zero is very important, but it must be done in a realistic and sensible way.
Simon, you've got 2 daughters who are educated here in Shropshire. Are you comfortable about the planning working with them?
Well, as I say, we've got to go further. But I think the point I'm making is that we have made very big strides, and sometimes we perhaps forget that in terms of what we've achieved as a country. But clearly we have a great deal more. But the overall situation across the world is not going to be decided by what we do, although it's extremely important that we make our contribution. It's actually going to be decided by some of the big polluting countries elsewhere in the world.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we move on to the second question, which is rather related, and I'll start with you with this one, Helen, and work around the tables. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future, warns the United Nations Climate Panel. The UK cannot solve the climate emergency alone, as we've just heard. So, what will your party do to provide responsible global leadership? And will you commit to financial support to reduce emissions globally and to protect countries which are still developing and have done the least to cause the climate crisis? Helen?
Well, thank you. And I think it is really important to acknowledge that we have a leadership role to play. We need to honour our commitment under the Paris Agreement, and that is something that we're absolutely committed to. If we start backing out of it, we may not have the biggest carbon emissions in the world, but we probably have some of the higher carbon emissions per head. And if we start backing out of it, it gives all those other countries a carte blanche to back out of it themselves. And we're all in this together, and we need to show leadership. So it's important that we have a realistic plan to meet our own commitments, and that we stick to it, and that we don't constantly wriggle away from that. In terms of protecting those countries that have lower emissions than us and are developing, where we would find that that support is through our commitment to international aid. We're still committed to the 0.7% of international aid for developing countries, and that needs to be used to help them with their own climate troubles. But it also means that they don't need to go through a fossil fuel stage of economic development. They can move directly onto renewables, and there's economic opportunity in there for those countries that have embraced it and moved forward as well. So it's really important that we don't just kind of wriggle out of it and say it's not our fault. Just on the progress that we've made so far, which is really good, a lot of that progress is due firstly to the fact that we used to produce most of our electricity through coal, and we've switched to gas, which is a lot cleaner. We need to take the next steps now. And as I mentioned in my previous answer, a lot of that progress is because the Liberal Democrats introduced a huge amount of offshore wind power when in coalition, and we're proud of that record. But we need to go further, and we need to show leadership on to ensure that the rest of the world doesn't get a free pass to back out of its own commitments.
Natalie?
So I think it's important to foster good international relations, and with a Labour government who won't be a laughing stock on the world stage anymore. I think it's important that a Labour government leads the way on their commitments to the global crisis, and that is through our Green Prosperity Plan, which is a world-leading agenda that will cut bills and create jobs across the whole of Britain's industrial heartlands, which means moving away from gas and oil in the North Sea and creating the jobs and transfer of jobs there in Scotland. I've forgotten the second half of the question.
The question is what will you do to help the developing countries who've done the least to cause climate crisis?
As Helen said, the commitment to international aid is really important to support the countries who are disproportionately affected by flooding, which has a knock-on effect with agriculture, which we're also seeing in Britain.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Craig?
Brilliant, thank you. So I suppose maybe if I start with kind of responsible global leadership and kind of the things that the Green Party have done. And I think probably one thing that really highlights that and the difference between some of the parties was our stance on Gaza. So not directly linked to the climate, but we were the first kind of party to call for a ceasefire, and I think that really shows the difference with a Green in the room. In terms of the question around international aid, yes, we would get to 0.7%, as we currently are, and raise that to 1% by 2033. We'd also be looking to support an international law against ecocide, so kind of those making it illegal to harm the environment, and then thirdly, just making sure, especially for the global south, so we'd be working with international partners to make sure we remove the debt burden on those countries in the global south. So, as many of my other colleagues have said on here, it's not fair that the people who are catching up are also who are impacted more by climate change. They need the support to get there.
Thank you very much. Simon?
With regard to the international leadership angle to it, so what will your party do to provide responsible global leadership? A very good example of that was the COP26, which was a great success and was hosted by the government in the UK. And as I mentioned earlier on, given the issues that exist internationally in terms of carbon emissions, international agreements are absolutely vital to this. And the second part of the question is, will you commit to financial support? Yes, certainly, and we are committed to overseas aid, and also more specifically with regard to climate change itself. One issue which we haven't mentioned so far in the discussion is nuclear power, and that is one of the cleanest energies, and we have committed as a government to expanding our nuclear capacity. And I mean, if you compare it to, say, France, which has substantial nuclear capacity, we need to catch up, and we have made a series of announcements on that in terms of large reactors, but also to approve 2 new fleets of small modular reactors. So that is a vital part of the mix. And we have also committed to invest 1.1 billion into the Green Industries Growth Accelerator, and to ensure that green levies on household bills are lower, but also to ensure that we build the first 2 carbon capture and storage clusters, and to treble offshore wind capacity. We are probably the leading country in the world in terms of offshore wind, and there's a great deal more that we can do, and that's a key part of, alongside nuclear, a key part of our way to further decarbonise our electricity production. So I think there is a great deal in the pipeline, and a great deal that's been done. But going back to the original question, I think global leadership and working together internationally is absolutely vital for this, given that we only represent 1% of the world's carbon emissions.
Thank you very much. Mark?
I think nuclear power stations. We have various types of power in this country, and the biggest investment at the moment is nuclear power. The only problem is the main investors in that French, Chinese, and Americans. What we need to do is own these stations. This country needs to own its own power production. That would bring the cost down dramatically yet again, and it would lessen emissions. So that is one of the things that we do. The reform will move into this partnership, and we will take over these companies, and make it British owned, British power to British homes, and that would be a less cost for the people living here. For countries that are suffering from the aspects of climate change, we would look at each country individually. In other words, not one checkbook would go for all, because some countries have it far worse than others, and we know that. So we look at each country individually, and then we help them, we give them aid. It's not their fault, and I don't say that for a second, but we have to look at it individually, because the times of giving blank cheques have gone. We've seen it done for the last 14 years, and blank cheques put us where we are now, and blank cheques before that, with the previous government, left us bankrupt. We can't do it anymore. We've got to look at things correctly, and we've got to help people where and when they need it.
Thank you very much. I'll come to you first on this next question. So the question is, the cost of living crisis has forced many people in our community into poverty, leaving them to feel crushed under the weight of debts and the lack of appropriate support, and often feeling they have no voice. So will you listen to the ideas and insights of people who have lived experience of poverty, and what will you say to those people? What involvement have you had in this constituency and with local community efforts to support people experiencing poverty? It's sort of right of your street, isn't it?
Yes, as you heard in the opening speech, I don't come from a privileged background, so I know a lot of the issues that people are facing today. I can relate to them because I've been there. I've been a child in that situation where we didn't have enough money for the heating. But I'm speaking to people today, this week about their issues that they're facing today, and I will be a listening MP. That this issue really matters to me, and I want to make a difference for the people who are struggling, and that is through Labour's first steps for change in the country, and my involvement in this constituency. During COVID, many people couldn't leave their homes, and I went out, even though I'm a full-time care worker. I volunteered at Osnosh in Oswestry, delivering food parcels to people's homes when they couldn't leave and they were isolating. Osnosh is a fantastic organisation that cuts down on food waste, so we're both helping reduce food waste and helping people who needed food delivered to the door.
Great.
Thank you. So 1 in 5 people in North Shropshire live in poverty. That's a fact. Where I live in North Shropshire, that rises to 1 in 3 people. So there is a complete spectrum across Shropshire, and the things that I've been doing are involved outside of kind of work. So I chair the Gowone Community Group, and our focus is purely on making sure the residents who don't ordinarily have the opportunity to maybe undertake some of the activities. So we put on a completely free fun day, we put on a relatively cheap pantomime this year as well, so the first time in 20 years, and I'm in the process of setting up a community very similar to this one, to make sure that actually all residents have the same opportunity where I live. The other bit that I would say, so the Joseph Rowntree Foundation have also been really clear that it's been 20 years and 6 Prime Ministers since there's been a sustained drop in poverty in this country. Just let that thing sink in a little bit. In terms of the Green Party, and I've mentioned some of the other policies previously, but we would invest in home insulation. Again, you would have economic, environmental benefits, but people would see lower energy bills and things like that. We'd also make sure we'd abolish the 2-child benefit cap, something brought in under this current government, which would lift over 250,000 children out of poverty. We would end the bedroom tax, and we would make sure we increase universal credit by £40 per week, which would again go some way to make sure people don't have to choose between heating and eating.
Thank you very much indeed. Simon.
With regard to people being able to combat the cost of living crisis, I think one of the most important things is that people are actually in work and able to get work. And one of the things that we have achieved over the last 14 years is to reduce the level of unemployment significantly. I mean, it's almost been halved from where it was in 2010, not quite, but almost. And that regular work is a key way to combat poverty. And also, we have introduced the national living wage, which has increased by 35% since 2010, so that people are not only in work, but they're getting a better wage in terms of what effectively was the minimum wage. So I think that's absolutely vital to helping people. During the COVID crisis, we went out of our way as a government to protect people from all backgrounds and all income groups in the country. And in some ways, the issues that we have as a government stem from that £400 billion that we had to borrow to keep the country safe. But I have to say that I'm proud that we did that, and that we did keep people safe and keep people protected from what could have been a fairly disastrous situation arising from COVID. And also, we have protected the increase in benefits. So the last increase of benefits was 10%, which is probably higher than a lot of people's wages in work grew by. But we felt that was very important to protect the most vulnerable in society. And then another aspect of poverty that I'd like to just highlight is with regard to the elderly, where we have continued with the triple lock, and we are going to make sure that the state pension is never taxed. That's one of our commitments. And so we've seen a very significant increase in pensions since 2010, and the last increase was 8.7%, so again, a lot higher than the current rate of inflation. But there's also other angles to the situation for elderly people. For instance, loneliness, and that's one of the things that I addressed in setting up the charity Concertina Music for the Elderly, because a lot of people in retirement, particularly if they're widowed, can lead very lonely lives, and I think it's a key part of what we have to do as a government and as politicians to try and help create connections for them and combat that loneliness.
Thank you very much. Mark.
Alright, great. Good evening. Right, the cost of living of many people, I mean, I come from the northeast, that's not renowned for being full of rich people. So I work here now as an ambulance driver. I'm on minimum wage. Not afraid of that. I do overtime to keep things going. So I'm definitely not rich. But I enter many homes where people are desperately short of cash, and you can see that just by the places you go. And we regularly refer them to helpful local people for that kind of assistance. However, we come back to things like minimum wage going up by 25%, but the minimum wage is being taxed by 20%. So in fact, you give them 5%. So that's not really it. It should be taxed not at £12,500, I say again, at £20,000. So a minimum wage, they keep their wage, and that will step them out of that poverty margin just that little bit more and give them a lot more help. It's about £1,500 difference, and possibly 2,000, but 1,500 is the realistic figure to look at. For the movement of elderly people, the elderly have trouble getting around, they have trouble with travel, they have trouble with their pensions. Well, state pensions, they shouldn't be taxed at all. They shouldn't be touched. They've already paid all the way through on a stamp, all the way through their life. They've retired, they need to rest and feel secure with something in their pocket. And that's the pension. And to tax it, I think that is tantamount to criminality. And that should be stopped. And it's one of the things to be done in 100 days by reform. And it's one of the better things that we do than what we go for. So we're helping everybody, and we're trying to get people out of that real circle of poverty.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm thinking back to about 6 weeks after I was sworn in, somebody contacted us and they couldn't afford the heating oil for their home, and they had a disabled daughter who needed to be kept warm. Not just because everybody needs to be kept warm and secure, but obviously for her own health. And it was harrowing actually. We had to ring round all the different heating oil suppliers and see if we could find somebody who would do a better deal for her. And those are the real life experiences of people who've been impacted by the cost of living crisis. it's a multifaceted problem, but just to give you some of the ideas of things that I've done to help people since I was elected and policy areas that we would try and push going forward. Liberal Democrats called for a windfall tax to help people with their energy bills in October 2021, and it took us a whole year to get that essentially put into policy by the government, and they still let some of those big energy companies off the hook by relieving their investment into further fossil fuels. So we're proud that we pushed that debate and got those people their help with their energy bills, but it could have been done more extensively, and we would absolutely do that retrospectively if we were in power. On a personal level, I fought a long campaign for people in the situation of that lady with the disabled daughter to make sure there's help for people with off-grid heating, and also for people, as I say, in park homes who are left out and unable to access any kind of help through that cost of living crisis, which is still ongoing, but obviously we're all a little bit more used to it now, which is not necessarily a good thing. As an MP, you have to deal with that fallout of poverty in your casework all the time, and it's always upsetting. We've had people struggling to access benefits, being humiliated essentially because they needed to try and get hold of a PIP payment. We've had people self-disconnecting from their prepayment meter because they couldn't afford to put any more money in. There is a whole range of issues around the cost of living that need to be addressed. Obviously, we try and help on a one-by-one basis with casework, but in terms of policy, we need to remove that two-child benefit cap. It's the simplest and easiest way to lift children out of poverty, and it's essential. And we also need to look at housing. The other thing that people are spending far too much money on, in addition to their energy bills and their food bills, is housing. We need to address the social housing crisis and the shortfall of 1.2 million people on social housing waiting list. It's really critical. And in food cost, we've seen food inflation higher than that headline rate of inflation. We need to be helping out farmers who are struggling, who aren't seeing any of that inflation feed through into their own pockets, and looking at the price gouging in the entire food chain to ensure that people can afford to live in a dignified way.
Thank you very much. And I'll come to you first with the fourth question. The fourth question, you won't be surprised to learn, is about health. Living in a rural area leaves our community at a disadvantage in healthcare. Lack of transport causes serious difficulty accessing hospital services, and funding for NHS services is at a lower rate than in urban areas, and we've been a low priority for receiving COVID vaccines or establishing diagnostic hubs. So, what would you do to ensure national funding and health vision care is fair and equitable between rural and urban areas? Craig Emery.
Okay, so we know across North Shropshire that there is a dental desert, first and foremost. And we know there are massive issues in the NHS and social care. So I've already been really clear in terms of Green Party position in terms of no privatisation of the NHS, and we are so clear on that. The main thing in terms of for ourselves in terms of funding for the NHS and social care is that we would look to put £50 billion into that, and that would be paid for, as I said previously, by a wealth tax. So for those with £10 million of wealth, they would pay an additional 1%, and for those with £1 billion of wealth, they would pay an additional 2%. And we think that's would generate substantial money to put into that. In terms of what we would look to do with that money, so is making sure there would be rapid access to a GP and same-day access for urgent need. Across England since 2019, the amount of GPs has risen by 2.4%. In Shropshire, it's fallen. So we are worse off now in terms of healthcare, in terms of wealth, and everything else in the rest of the UK. That is the record of this government. And worse still is that the GPs in North Shropshire are also, on average, have far more patients than GPs in the rest of the UK. In terms of social care, so we'd make sure there was free personal care to ensure there was dignity in old age for all people, and a lot of that would centre on ensuring that we have earlier access, which would maintain more well-being and independence in their own home.
Thank you. Simon Baines.
Thank you very much. Going to the question, what would you do to ensure national funding and health provision is fair and equitable between rural and urban areas? I personally think we do need to look again at that balance. I've lived most of my life in rural borderland between Wales and here in Shropshire, and clearly the provision of healthcare in a rural area is very different to in an urban area. So I agree with the questioner that that needs to be looked at again. I think another area that all parties need to look at is that currently Shropshire Council, and I think I'm right in saying this, 87% of their expenditure is on statutory services, particularly care of the elderly and children. And this is creating pressure on the rest of their expenditure, as I think we're all well aware. And I think that needs looking at as well. So those are the two areas which I think do need a lot of attention. I mean, with regard to what the government has done over recent years, we have delivered 2.5 million more GP appointments per month since 2019. Clearly the pandemic put huge pressure on the NHS, and it's taken some time to start getting the waiting lists to come down. With regard to the reference to dental care, we have a dental recovery plan to deliver 2.5 million additional NHS dental appointments. But I think there's a bigger picture to all this, a broader picture, and to be fair to the Labour Party, I think they've picked up on this as well, which is, how do we actually provide the care that we want to provide to everybody through the NHS? I mean, the fact is that NHS expenditure is at record levels, and we as a government, far from cutting it, we've increased it in real terms significantly. And obviously we've got a larger population. I mean, since my elder daughter was born in the year 2000, the population of this country has increased by 10 million. So, we have to face facts that we are having to provide a free service to many other people. And I think whoever wins the next election is going to need to look at how we provide our healthcare. And I would hope that there can be a degree of cross-party cooperation on that, because we love the NHS, but it's quite difficult to provide the service that we want without it engulfing the overall government expenditure. So those are some initial thoughts on what I think is an incredibly important question.
Thank you. Mark Whittle.
What we've got is a major problem, and that is the larger locations around Britain are now emptying, and they're emptying into the countryside, and that's us. So our populations are growing terribly fast. We haven't got an infrastructure to match it. We're building houses by the thousands. Our doctor's surgery is still the same size, and we can't do it. We need to be building more pharmacies for the first man, so you go there when you first become ill. Then you move to your doctors for a dip, possibly a small surgery, which they do, and then onto A&E if you have to. But remember, you're in a rural area. It's 20 to 25 minutes to get to any major hospital from where I'm sat. So you need that ambulance station reopening, and also Street's ambulance station reopening. Ambulances sat around, but it's the numbers of people we've got, and they just can't manage it. You need a massive reinvestment into the ambulance service, into the hospitals, so the nursing and ambulance, and as you've already put down, beds in hospital, which you've already been hard working towards. These need to be actioned, and they need to be actioned immediately. Because if you ring up your doctors now, you could be waiting a week to 2 weeks for anything. We are saying that if you wait 3 weeks, you'll get a ticket and you can go private anywhere you like. Because your health comes first. And in reality, if you're not healthy, you're not paying taxes, and there's nothing going in the country. So everybody's getting something back of something. You're getting your health, hopefully, and you will live a long, long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Helen Morgan.
Thank you. Just sort of wanted to return to the question, which is about equitable health provision between rural and urban areas. In my office, we had a mantra that if it isn't acceptable in Birmingham, it shouldn't be acceptable in North Shropshire. And it's a really, really important point to start from. And we've seen over the last few years that we are experiencing a situation which isn't fair, which isn't happening elsewhere in the country, or certainly isn't happening to the same severe extent, particularly around ambulance waiting times, but also around doctor surgeries. I mean, it's a 5-week wait for a non-urgent appointment at my surgery, and we are seeing people waiting 24 hours, maybe even longer, on plastic chairs in A&E because they can't be admitted to hospital. And frankly, it's a disgrace. So what would we do to sort that out? Well, on a personal level, I think the word is harangued the health minister ever since I was first elected, and managed to secure £21 million for Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust to put in 52 extra beds in those 2 hospitals, split between the 2 sites, which are being managed by the Community Health Trust, to try to ease flow through the hospital so that people who are able to go home but not able to go home without help can have a sort of a step down level where they're cared for by the Community Health Trust in the hospital. And that should ease this problem of people waiting in A&E to be admitted to hospital and ambulances queuing outside A&E because they can't get in, essentially. So that's a sort of practical thing on a practical level that I've achieved. Has it made a material difference? I think the answer to that is not as much as we would have liked to have seen, and there's plenty more to do on that. But what about this overall issue of rural fair funding? It's not being addressed by the government. The link between the cost to deliver services by a council and the funding from central government broke down years ago, and despite lots of warm words, that fair funding formula has never been reassessed. I've been fighting continually in Parliament to have that reassessed, because that would impact on public health measures that would prevent people needing to go to A&E in the first place. And it's important that we take a similar approach with health as well. So our GP plan involves a rural premium to encourage GPs to come and work in more rural areas where we have a chronic shortage, so that people can get the appointments they need, ideally within a lot less than 5 weeks.
Thank you. And Natalie Rowley.
Thank you. So in North Shropshire, we've seen over the last 14 years our health services declining. Maternity services have been removed from the community. Ambulance stations. Where I live in St Martin's, our GP, despite all the house building and the increased population, our GP services in the community were removed. And trying to get an NHS dentist was it was very difficult. And we see this exacerbated with centralised services because of our transport links are so poor in a rural area. The NHS has taken a kick-in by the Conservatives and the Lib Dems, and it's Labour's policy. Our priority is to tackle the difficulties in the NHS and cut the waiting times there. We need to move away from sticking plaster policies of increasing beds, and I know how much is submitted. It hasn't made a lot of difference because it's very complex to tackle, but it's a whole system working together and moving in the right direction, and when one part of it doesn't work, it creates a bottleneck. And social care is a major issue where people need the assessments and the care to go back into the community, and it's just not happening. On the dentist, Labour's plan is to start start toothbrushing service in schools for 3 to 5 year olds, creating good practice so that when they can take that routine into adulthood and better teeth, because the major admissions for children at the moment are tooth removal due to tooth decay. So that would help moving forwards.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you, and thank you for these preset questions. So now it's more of an open house, and we have a roving mic, do we not? We believe we have. So if you'd like to, I know I saw lots of people scribbling away, so if you have a question to ask, please raise your hand. Wait for the microphone to come to you, and the first thing you say is what is your name? What do you want to do?
Raise your hands, Chris.
Lady in there.
Hi, my name's Christine Robertson.
Again?
And Christine Robertson.
Christine? Yeah.
My question to all of the panel is, when is somebody in one of the parties going to get a grip of the regulatory system in this country with regards to electricity, energy supply and water? This is ridiculous in 2024 that we have a sewage problem going into our rivers and seas and people becoming ill. The problems with cost of electricity, which has been linked to the wholesale price of gas, and that should never have happened, and that was under the Conservatives. That needs to be rectified. So who is actually going to take this mantle and do something with it? It's the only thing that is going to help our water bills and our energy bills.
Are you talking about renationalisation?
That would be a step potentially, because I think it's ridiculous that water, which is a necessity of life, is in private hands.
Right.
It's only the shareholders that matter. That is morally wrong.
Okay, thank you. Let's come to Simon first, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Christine, for the question. Starting with the issue of privatisation and national ownership, it's quite interesting to look at the situation in Wales, where the water company Dŵr Cymru is a not-for-profit organisation, and its record in terms of environmental control is actually worse than virtually every company in England. So the point I make is it's not necessarily the ownership that is the issue, but I totally take the point that you're making, that things that need to be improved. I mean, I am very pleased that since 2010, the increased monitoring of storm overflows is now 100% compared to 7% in 2010. And another example of how things have improved is that 90% of designated bathing waters.
So the question is, what are you going to do to get a grip?
Absolutely, and what I'm saying is that we have made a number
Yeah,
of
but
changes.
there's more to do, isn't there?
Yes.
What happens next?
Well, in terms of what happens next, we are going to be tougher on the water pollution in terms of fines, and we've levied over 150 million in terms of fines on people, on the companies that are causing these problems. And we're working with regulators to hold water companies to account, including banning bonuses if a company committed a criminal breach. And we're using fines from water companies to invest in river restoration projects. And we want to reform the price review regulatory process for water companies, and also provide Ofwat with new powers to clamp down on excessive dividends. Those are some of the measures that we either have taken or intend to take.
Craig Emery.
Thank you. So just to be really clear, so the Green Party, and I'll throw railways into this as well, so railways, water companies and the big five energy companies are in the manifesto to be renationalised. So totally agree with you. I think, quite frankly, it is a disgrace. So Severn Trent, where I live, they have paid out the highest amount of dividends to the shareholders out of all the water companies, and we can see how much they have pumped into the rivers and seas. Just in terms of some other things, so we'd make sure as well that we stop that sewage pumping into the rivers and seas, making sure we also set aside 30% of our land and sea by 2030 to receive the highest priority in protection, and that's just to make sure that the nature and animals as well are also protected.
Thank you. I couldn't find any reference of sewage in the party manifesto.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Well,
our commitment is to holding water companies to account, and you know, when Labour left office, we had our beaches and our rivers were clean and they were lovely to visit. And after 14 years of the Conservatives being in charge, you can't go to the beach without becoming ill, and our rivers exactly the same. It's disgraceful, and they've let them get this way. We need to change the system and hold our private water companies to account and make sure when they violate the regulations that they are fined and that they don't do it again. You know, it needs to be a punishment. Because, you know, for my family, it's, you know, when we go on holiday, we want to enjoy our waterways. On the cost of electricity, Labour's plan to switch on GB Energy will tackle the security of our energy in Britain, and we won't, you know, be reliable on foreign dictators for our energy anymore, and it will bring jobs to the UK, and more importantly, people's bills will be lower.
If you're re-elected, Helen, how will the water companies spend money versus having to pay for it in our bills? Because the bills will go up, won't they?
Well, I mean, the situation with sewage in our rivers is a national disgrace, isn't it? I mean, even just in North Shropshire, 6,000 hours of sewage dumping last year alone. I've been to the River Morden near the sewage works and watched it pour out. It's absolutely disgusting. And the Conservatives missed the opportunity to make that illegal when they voted against an amendment that would have achieved that back in October 2021. So what would we do about it, which is the more important question, is change the water companies to become public benefit companies so that the profits that they make need to be reinvested back into the infrastructure so we can sort out this problem of illegal sewage dumping. But we also need to get rid of Ofwat. It's failed, it's had no teeth, it's singularly not prevented this sewage dumping from happening. So we need to replace that with a Clean Water Authority with the teeth, the legislative teeth to deal with the issue that we've got. That's absolutely in our top priority on the first page of our manifesto. Just to talk a little bit about energy, I used to work for British Gas. I have some experience in the energy industry, and the reason we pay so much for our energy is that your electricity in particular is costed at the marginal price, the bit that you have to pay for the last bit of electricity that you produced, and that in this country is dependent on the gas price. And so we just need to reduce our dependence on gas. One of the reasons we were so badly hit in the cost of living crisis is because we have a lot of gas to produce our electricity. We use gas for all our heating, broadly speaking. We are too dependent on gas. We need to get investment in renewables, which are the cheapest form of electricity production, wind in particular, but other forms of renewable as well, because that is the way to wean ourselves off that dependence on the gas price, and it's critical that we do it.
Mark, how would you reform the utilities?
Quite a fun. As of 1 o'clock this afternoon, Nigel Farage actually put it forward. We would take over these gas companies, electricity companies, power companies, water companies. The government would take them over. We would run them. 50%. We have a 100-day charter that we'd start the ball rolling within that 100 days of in there. That would be the accountability. If they do something wrong, not only will they be fined, but the owners or the managers of the company, for the team, will be taken to court. They have to be punished. This idea of saying naughty boy and them getting rid of it because it's done has happened again and again under Conservatism and under Labour. So I'm not blaming one, I'm blaming both. Because every single time something's gone wrong, nationally, on the trains, on the water, the things, nobody's punished. They just say, oh well, and the managers just pass it on to the next, and that's the same with the post office. So nationalisation from reform, and we're looking at that's how it will be done. No middleman, we just go for it.
Does that satisfy you a little bit, Christine?
It's gone on like this for years, and somebody needs to make a stand, and the public certainly need to make their voices known, and
what I find most galling is you put an extra heater, sweater on, turn the heating down to save electricity, and they put the standing charge down. Get the money back. Next question. The lady with pink or purple, rosy pink sweater jacket.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Carolyn Lawrence. I'm Debt Centre Manager for Christians Against Poverty in Market Drayton. We've touched a bit on the cost of living crisis and poverty, and 59% of our clients live below the poverty line. Market Drayton is quite an island community in a way because our transport links are so bad, and what I find with many of my clients is they can't get work unless they can get it in Market Drayton if they haven't got a car. So my question is, what would you do to support transport systems in rural areas like Market Drayton?
Who'd like to go first? Mark?
Well, the Democrats and Elder Street were hoping for a railway line that was going to cost about 12 to 13 million pounds. That travels a mile and a half to take 50 people to.
Does anything like that?
But it's not going to cost that because you could invest £2 million, buy a fleet of small minibuses, 2 minibuses to each of the rural towns. There's 5 of them in the county. Then buses would be runners from the outlying villages, the hinterland, and they could run in and out of these villages into the towns on the market day. It would the sociability of the mixing. It would include the money coming into the markets. It would give a better shopping experience for the elderly. It would cover everything. 2 buses of 25 seaters, you go up and down them lanes, and that would do it. And you could do that with £2 million, and that would run absolutely fine. And it's a small investment for what you get back, and that could run down the whole county. 2 buses for each town, and they're just doing that job. Just round your hinterland, just round your 5-mile radius around your towns.
I've got a feeling you might want to respond.
Well, I think we need to be a little bit more ambitious than that, actually, because we've got people, particularly in Market Drayton, which has the worst bus service in the whole county. Nowhere has a bus service on a Sunday. Market Drayton, you can only realistically go to Stoke or, in fact, it's Hanley or Shrewsbury. And so we do need to have a more integrated bus service. We need to be able to get to Telford. We need to be able to get to Whitchurch. People need to be able to go for further than just a couple of miles in their hinterland, frankly. We want to expand people's horizons. So it's my view that councils should be able to franchise their own bus services, that bus services need to be regular and reliable before people will use them. At the moment, they're not used because they're not frequent enough and they're not reliable enough. So people can't use them. You can't risk getting stuck 30 miles from home if you don't think the bus is going to come and get you. So they need to be regular and reliable. That means they need upfront investment in order to become commercially sustainable. And on the point about the railway line, the transport system needs to be integrated. If we had a bus service that ran from Whitchurch to Market Drayton and back, people would be able to catch the train in Whitchurch and get to Manchester, Crewe. They'd be able to link onto the Birmingham line down at Shrewsbury. It would open up a whole world of opportunity to them. And that really is the point of the Oswestry-Gibbowen line, which has had a full strategic business case, which has been signed off as commercial by the Department for Transport. It will allow people who live in Oswestry who don't have a car to get quickly to on the other side of the platform to a train which from next year is going to link them directly to London, to Wrexham, to Chester, and open up their horizons. For people who don't have access to a car, we need an integrated transport solution because otherwise we're just not offering them the opportunities that other people have, and I think that's absolutely critical.
How do you pay for that bus to Whitchurch? Because the Shropshire County Council are having to cut bus subsidies, not increase them.
Absolutely, I think it needs. We were promised we were going to bus back better, and there was going to be £15 billion of bus funding, and none of that materialised over the last 5 years. But that's the kind of ambition we need to see. We need to see initial investment in bus services so that people can rely on them and use them, and then they become viable in their own right in the long term. But the odd bus running at weird times of day, not regularly, not turning up on time, no information available, people aren't going to use it, they aren't going to be commercially viable. We need to have a vision and invest in it, and I think it will reap reward.
Natalie Rowley.
So me and Helen agree on this about the buses and our local communities having more control over where they go and not just for profit. The private companies will only operate bus services when they're in profit. Taking back that control to the community we will spread the cost so that we run services that might not be in profit, but they benefit the community. We have a template in Manchester that's been taken to Shrewsbury about having greener, faster, more reliable bus services, which can be replicated in smaller towns like Market Drayton. And I think another issue is about jobs. We need jobs creation so that you don't have to travel halfway across the county to find a suitable job. Bringing jobs to local areas and the investment in local communities is needed. On the railway point, I live in Oswestry and I haven't met a single person that thinks it's a brilliant idea. The money would be better invested in a reliable bus service that goes in time with the trains and opening a safe footpath and cycle path to Oswestry. The money would be better spent on that.
Very Henry.
Thank you. So yeah, I think I won't go over the points, but the bit around making sure all the transport is integrated is really, really key, especially in Market Drayton. Just some specifics from us. So we'd be really clear in increasing public subsidies for bus and rail travel, and giving control to the local authorities and the funding to make sure local bus services are improved. So I think currently Shropshire Council subsidises 97% of bus routes in Shropshire. So clearly they need some more support with that. The other thing that I'd just be really clear that we haven't kind of mentioned and something that's quite key to our manifesto is investing in active travel and cycle routes. So we would invest £2.5 billion every year to make sure that there's more kind of footpaths and cycleways, and that's just locally. Obviously, I'm not expecting someone from Market Drayton to bike to Telford, but we also need to be really sensible about actually there's some great local businesses, but they would be far easier to get to if people could get there in safe ways on a path or a cycleway.
And Simon Moons.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Carolyn, for the question. I think it's absolutely vital. I mean, two of the recent innovations or adaptations that have been introduced by Shropshire Council are looking at free bus services on certain days and also public transport on demand. And I think we do need to be more imaginative about how we provide the public transport. Because there may not be sufficient demand for the whole of a bus, but there may be demand at certain different times of day for transport, and it's one of the things that we touched on in this discussion earlier, particularly with regard to the elderly. So I think those more imaginative and flexible approaches to bus services are absolutely vital. We as a party have committed in our manifesto to £1 billion for hundreds of new bus routes across the North and the Midlands, to extend the £2 bus fare cap in England for the whole of the next Parliament. That certainly helped a lot of people. And also to work with Active Travel England to make it safer for people to walk or to cycle. But your point is really with regard to the transport here in Market Drayton, and that's a very fair point. The other issue I'd like to mention is that it was the scrapping of the second part of HS2 which actually led to the money that is now available for projects such as the Oswestry to Bern line. And that has been very much a project which has been worked on by many different people over a long period of time. And I know that there are a lot of people in the North Shropshire who have been trying to work on these very tricky issues. And I think we should commend them over a long period of time for trying to find sensible solutions to these transport issues.
Let's move on if we can. John, where would you like to go next? Chap with glasses in the second row here. And again, we have your name clearly, please.
Hi, my name is Shawnee Connor and I'm a university student at Keele University. As a young voter, like many, it's my first time voting in a general election, and from research and what's been said today, those who've had experience in managing money on larger scales are Simon, Craig and Helen. But for all younger voters in North Shropshire who may be watching at home, and for some who may be in this room, how will all the parties' economic policies, which have been set out for the next 5 years, benefit our younger generation for our future, but also the future of our parents, grandparents and other elderly relatives?
Okay, Craig.
So I think the first one, where I would say it will generate for everyone, is we would see, I would say, a fairer, cleaner society. So we've already mentioned before, obviously a lot of the manifesto is focused on tackling that net zero. The other bit for specifically for yourself in terms of higher education and things like that. So we would end tuition fees and restore grants available for students as well. In terms of maybe some younger children, so across schools, so we increased school funding by 8 billion, which would allow all children to have a free school meal every day, and we would also make sure that breakfast clubs were available for children up to year 6 as well. Does that answer everything?
Well, let's try someone else and see what else we can. Helen, last time your party had any authority in government, you put the university fee up.
Yes, I think there's a question about economic policy, wasn't it? I think the reality of being in coalition is that you cannot achieve all of your policy objectives. And as a junior partner and a party that believes in coalitions and in proportional representation and everybody's vote counting, that's a reality of grown-up politics. Unfortunately, not everybody sees it like that. I think in terms of achievements in coalition, we're very proud of some of the things we did achieve, such as introducing the triple lock on pensions and lifting millions of pensioners out of poverty, and the concept of an income tax threshold going up with inflation so that people in the lowest earnings brackets didn't pay tax on their income, something that's been reversed recently by the Conservatives. But in terms of economic policy, I think there are national issues that we need to consider, but also local ones. So if you talk to local businesses, which I have done frequently since I was elected, the key issue here is a lack of people to work in them. Really, really important issue for them. And the way that we address that particular issue is sort of manifest, really. All the things we've been talking about in terms of infrastructure, so public transport and housing, so that young people can afford to stay and work here and get to work. We need to look at skills. At the moment, the skills that people have when they come out of school or university maybe not match up with what's required in the workplace. So we need to have vocational skills given equal value in society to academic ones, and we need to make sure that those skills are matched with what people in the economy need. That's absolutely critical. And we need to look at the way some of our smaller businesses, which are our biggest employers actually, are able to do business. So business rate reform, for example, is a critical part of that. And another opportunity that's been missed in the last government, we need to totally rethink how we do business rates and make sure that smaller people running smaller businesses, particularly on high streets, are able to pay a fair amount compared to giant companies mainly operating online. And behind all of that, you need an industrial strategy and a workforce plan, and also a plan to get people off hospital waiting lists and back to work. So there's no simple, straightforward answer to what do we do for the economy, but there are all sorts of things that we need to prioritise. I think our manifesto prioritises them. I think the local focus that I've had as an MP has looked at some of those issues individually, particularly around transport and around housing and around health. So lots of different issues to deal with to make the economy grow in the future. But you know, there isn't a simple answer, but we do need a strategy and we need a clear policy direction so that businesses, when they make their investment decisions, know what they're going to be dealing with going forward.
Simon, what do the Tories do to help the youth of today flourish?
Well, one of the key areas that we would do is to introduce 100,000 more apprenticeships in England every year by the end of the next Parliament. And this has been a great success story over recent years. We've delivered 5.8 million apprenticeships since 2010 and created apprentice routes into 70% of occupations. You've had the introduction of T-levels as well as A-levels. And I think it's really important that we make sure that the practical vocational education and training gets an equal measure and support as university. So that's one of the key areas. A second area is the lower level of unemployment, as I mentioned earlier on. I can't stress this enough. If you want people to get off to a good start in life, then there have got to be plenty of jobs available. And that has been one of the great success stories over recent years. And also we are looking to make sure that those in work don't have to pay so much tax. So we've already cut the national insurance from 12% to 8% over the last 12 months. And we have a target to reduce it to 6% by 2027. And our long-term ambition is to abolish it altogether. But that is really, really important for helping particularly young people. And also, again, as I mentioned earlier on, I'm sorry to repeat it, but it is of critical importance to young people, is that the national living wage and the fact that that's been increased by 35% in real terms since 2010 is absolutely vital for young people, because often they're going in at that level of pay and they're working their way up from there. So those are some of the key ways that we would continue to help young people, particularly entering the job market.
Would you have voted, Sean, if you were 16?
No. No.
You don't want the vote at 16? No, okay. It's part of the party policy.
That's part of my pitch to you. On the economic stability, it's Labour's first plan for change for the country. Growing the economy is the secure foundation. That will be the #1 mission, because once we get the economy growing, the house building, it will make easier for young people to get on the ladder. And Labour's pitch to young people is the 6,500 new teachers in schools, so that we have teachers who are specialists in their subjects actually teaching young people, putting the arts back on the curriculum. We have the youth hubs, so that specialist services are all in one area for young people, and they can access mental health provision. They've had a tough time over the last couple of years during COVID, and they just can't access the mental health services that they need, and it's a very long wait. We also have the youth guarantee for when you're leaving education. There should be opportunities for young people between 18 and 21, so that they're either working apprenticeships or continuing with training, so that they're productive and they earn money. And also votes for 16 and 17-year-olds. At 16, I started my first job, and I worked hard. I should have a say over who governs our country, because the policies that governments implement impact disproportionately on younger people and people from underprivileged backgrounds.
Thank you. Any more questions from the floor? Gentleman over there, 4 rows back. And again, if you give us your name, please, sir.
Were we not covering national service? Did we not cover national service for young people? Did you cover that, Simon?
All right, quick, John.
Nobody's asked that question.
No. John. No, you're from Nathan.
My name's not John, but that's fine. My name's Nathan from Weaksall. Firstly, on the right-hand side of the stadium, it looks like you've been told off by your mum because no one seems to be happy. I would have thought you'd be pleased to be here rather than look like you've been slapped.
It's a serious business, politics.
It is, but you know, I thought we'd be at least jovial to be in Market Drayton. No one's mentioned the B word, Brexit. I hate to bring you back to that. You know, could you please comment on your personal views and your party's views on Brexit and how it's gone, and what you think we should be doing next?
Thank you. Simon, were you in favour of Brexit?
Yes, I was in favour of Brexit. I voted for it, and I believe that Brexit brings many benefits to us as a country. We saw it very early on in terms of the how we dealt with the pandemic, in that we were able to introduce the vaccine several months ahead of the rest of Europe. I think that with regard to the Brexit process itself, clearly there have been some issues, but the friction that exists, certainly in terms of trade, has diminished dramatically between ourselves and Europe. And it has enabled us to take a more international view as a country, so that we are the only country in Europe that is part of the CPTPP, which is the Far Eastern trading bloc, and we've signed many other trade deals which will benefit the country. And we have to remember that whilst Europe is a very important market for us, it has reduced dramatically as an overall proportion of international trade, and it's gone down significantly from where it was in terms of the share of international trade when we joined the EU compared to where it is today. And therefore, being part of the CPTPP is actually incredibly beneficial to us longer term. It's quite interesting that in a period since we left the EU, we have actually shot up the table of international exporters, so we're now fourth in the world. So the benefits that we're seeing in terms of greater flexibility are very important, and also it's very important for the decisions that we can make here as a country, and often those are micro decisions, but given that we're not governed by what's happening in Europe, it gives us the ability to really access the best decisions that we possibly can. So I think that there are many benefits from Brexit. I think the other thing I would say to you is that since we've left the EU, we don't really, I mean, if you take the newspapers, for instance, there's relatively little coverage of what's going on in Europe compared to what there was before. And so sometimes we forget that actually the problems they're having in Europe are either the same as we're having here, or in fact greater. I mean, it's interesting that since 2010, we have grown faster as an economy than all the other leading European countries. And that's partly because of late we've had greater flexibility. And also, if you look at the results from the EU elections just last week, you're seeing a massive shift to the right, to the far right. And I believe that you've got to have control of your country if you are to reassure people that you can conduct your business and the future of your country in the right way. Now, we can argue as to whether that's been the case or not, but we do have that sovereignty now. And if you don't have that sovereignty, you lead to greater extremism, which frankly is what we're seeing in the rest of Europe, and we're not seeing here. So I think it's not only economic, I also think it's political as well, and it's of very great importance to us for our longer term health and future as a country.
Mark, has Brexit and the implementation of Brexit been a success?
No.
Or are you
No, it hasn't been a success. It was brought forward to the people voted for it, for Brexit, to come out of Europe. We haven't come out of Europe. What's happened is the Conservatives came in and they said they put every stay in on the committees of Brexit. We are now separated. Britain is Great Britain. It's England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Brussels is trying to separate our kingdom. That's not in their constitution. They aren't allowed to do that. We are one nation, and we should stay a nation. We shouldn't be paying export taxes and whatever else to go over there. Forget them. We are one country, and that's it. We joined together. When I served in the forces, every single member was a different country. It was quite amazing. We have a member here from Ireland, and that's it. That's how it is. Also, we have a 12-mile fishing zone that everybody is. It's not. That's our waterline. When they fish there, the fish that are caught there, they land in Britain. That's what they've got to do. They land in Britain, we tax them on it. They need a licence for that. If they don't have a licence, we do what the French do. We take the ship. And if they pay the fine, that's good. But we went for Brexit. We want full Brexit. We don't want to be picked on, hit on, because we're the first to leave. And that's the only reason why we are having it so bad. We're the first ones to leave, but we haven't got the guts to stand up. And that's the Conservative Party who haven't got the guts. Reform have.
Rachel Reeves, your Shadow Chancellor, was hinting just the other day that there might be something about creeping back into Europe.
Well, I don't think she said creeping back into
No, she didn't.
Europe.
No, she didn't.
She didn't. No, she said a closer working relationship, which is not undemocratically taking us back into the EU like the Lib Dems want. Brexit, we've had a rough deal really with the failure of the Conservatives to deliver it. Now, it might come as a surprise, but I supported Brexit. I believe that we should have control over our own country, but the Conservatives failed to put in a proper plan. We had skill shortages. The farmers have had a raw deal with the environmental land management scheme payments. They've been shortchanged by the Conservative government, and the red tape on the exports and the imports means that they're not, they can't trade properly. And we currently have the highest immigration under the Conservatives, despite them trying to be, their image is tough on immigration.
Simon, do you want to come back on that?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Do you want to come back on that? Yeah.
Yes,
Come
I
to
mean,
Craig and Alan in a moment.
look, on the issue of immigration, there are two strands to it. There's the illegal migration and there is the legal migration. And the big increase that we've seen in migration, or people coming into the country, let's put it that way, is really mainly due to an increase in legal migration, and also the fact that we have provided a safe place for people from Ukraine, Afghanistan, and from Hong Kong as well. So these factors have combined together to increase the level of immigration into the country. Now the government has made some key decisions, not least of all that those people who are students can't, international students, can't bring dependents to the country, and that's already leading to a 25% fall in immigration levels. And then with regard to illegal migration, we have been opposed every step of the way by the Labour Party and by the Liberal Democrats in the measures that we're trying to bring in to combat that. And that lies in our Rwanda bill primarily. And the Rwanda bill does two things. One is it provides a place for people to be taken to, and that is a policy which is now being looked at by many European countries, I may say. And the second element it does is to raise the bar at which an appeal can be successful. Now, I was briefly the immigration minister in 2022 for 2 months, so I saw for myself what really goes on. And one of the major difficulties that we have is that the legal structure in this country is such that even if somebody has been deemed not to have asylum in this country, and therefore to have to leave the country, they can make appeal after appeal, which slows down the whole process. So the Rwanda bill also addresses that issue as well. But
the Rwanda bill is very expensive, and less than 1% of asylum seekers will actually be taken to Rwanda. It's a policy that just doesn't work and costs a lot of money.
Well-
Labour's policy on this is to reinvest the money for to launch our border security command and tackle the criminal gangs that are exploiting vulnerable people who want to get to Britain. Labour has a long-term plan to tackle immigration. Short-term Rwanda scheme that costs a ridiculous amount of money is unviable.
Simon, very quickly.
Well, the Labour Party, as I say, and the Liberal Democrats have opposed every single measure that we've tried to introduce to combat illegal migration. And it's very easy to sit up here and say, oh well, we'll break the gangs. It's incredibly difficult to do these things, otherwise they would have been done already. And you've got to create a disincentive to come here, and that's why a lot of other countries are looking at the Rwanda scheme. And as I say, we've got to tighten the legal framework that exists, which, for instance, Sir Keir Starmer has been a main exponent of in terms of during his legal career before he became Director of Public Prosecutions, to actually stop people being deported from the country. So you can't have it both ways. You've got to put in the measures if you want to actually reduce illegal migration.
I will come to you, but let's talk to Helen and Craig first. I'll come to you again. Helen.
So going back to the original question, it won't surprise anyone to know that I voted Remain. I'm a Liberal Democrat, and that is not some kind of dirty secret. What's happened since, I think, is really problematic. We talk about the trade deals with Australia and New Zealand and the CPTPP. For an area like ours, which is underpinned by an agricultural economy, they've caused huge problems. So, for example, the CPTPP allows egg products to be imported into this country that have been produced from battery hens, which have been illegal for many, many years. The Australian and New Zealand deals allow meat to come into the country that has been produced to a lower standard of animal welfare than we would expect, and that our farmers are proud to produce. So they have been really, really problematic, and I am very concerned about them, not necessarily because of the volumes of trade that will happen under those deals, but because they set a precedent for every future trade deal that we do, and that's a really dangerous place to be. We shouldn't be offshoring our environmental responsibility. We should be upholding the standards that we are rightly proud of in this country for food production, and making people who want to import to our country meet them. There's huge friction and red tape in trade with Europe. There may not be tariff barriers, but there are huge, huge trade barriers. So, for example, I was speaking recently to a company that breeds show jumping horses. And they have two separate problems. One is that every time they take a horse to Europe to compete and show off its credentials and improve its value for breeding, they have to now pay a huge amount of money to get veterinary certificates, health checks, etc., to go and compete in those competitions. And then when they bring the horse back, they have to do exactly the same thing. So if they go to several competitions in a year, it costs them hundreds and hundreds of pounds. The other thing they do is import semen to inseminate horses here, and from prize stallions across Europe. And we had to go to DEFRA and essentially highlight the logistical issues that the new checks that have been introduced would involve, because that business was becoming increasingly unviable under those arrangements. Now, DEFRA have listened, and that problem has been ironed out, but the exporting to Europe problem absolutely still exists. If you're a farmer exporting breeding livestock to Europe, it's almost impossible because there are no border control points on the French and Belgian entry points. So it's wrong to say it hasn't had an impact. We need to work on improving our relationship with Europe so that we can trade smoothly and that we can access our biggest and our nearest market. And that doesn't preclude us from doing trade deals around the world. It just means that we need to be able to continue to trade with our biggest and nearest market.
Thank you. I think Greens actually want to go back in.
Yes, so Green Party is really clear that we would seek to rejoin the EU as soon as kind of the political conditions are right. I suppose in terms of making your question from the start, did I vote for Brexit? I actually did. I wasn't a member of the Green Party then, but yes, I did. Do I think it's been a success? No. And do I think we should rejoin it? Yes, I do. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, and a lot of the things we were sold in terms of the benefits haven't materialised, whether it's been mismanaged or whatever it is, and there's far too many barriers. We've just got too angry, I feel, in this country. That's the easiest way to summarise it. We've seen the growth of the right, that there's too much anger, and I think the other thing that I would just wanted to address is that there is no such thing as illegal immigration. So every person fleeing persecution has the right to claim asylum, and I just wanted to address that whilst we were on the point.
You wanted to say one more thing, very quickly, Mark.
Yeah, just reference the immigration problem we're having with France at the moment. The Conservative government have paid over £500 million to France over the last 3 years to help them stop immigration, to help them stop coming on the boats. Just to put that right, over 36 months by down, that's £13.8 million a month, £3 million a week. Now, what we're saying is, when they come over in the small boats, we simply return them. Not in the small boats, we put them on something safe, take them back to France, that's yours. We cannot pay £500 million over that amount of time for them to supply life jackets and put people in the boats. It is madness. So why the British government has continued to pay that money when we know this is happening is quite shocking.
Yes, go on.
You need to process applications for asylum seekers to the UK.
Move the microphone nearer to you.
So you need to process the asylum seekers when they are seeking asylum to the country. But you still need to process the asylum seekers.
Okay. Quick show of hands, who now regrets leaving Europe? Okay.
You're
Got time
mad.
for one question, John?
Can I just ask one question?
Let the microphone come to you, please. Gentleman on the end here, the back here.
Quite short. I will be very short.
My name's Gerald Smith. When we were in the European Union, I think we were one of the most benefited countries out of the 28 member states, from what I've learned. So by coming out of it, if we go back into it again, we'll be relegated to a much lower place. Is it worth going back into it then?
Well, we're not going to go back into it. None of the parties are actually, apart from the Green Party, will sign very quickly.
Gerald, thanks for your question, but with all due respect, we weren't amongst the most benefited, because we were in fact net beneficiaries to the EU. And the other thing is that the way the EU actually gave its grants, I think, was very unfair. So, for instance, it would go for specific areas where it made sort of blanket decisions on where deprivation lay, and actually the country is much more complex than that. So you've got areas, I mean, you know, that might look relatively wealthy to others, but they've got pockets of deprivation. And what it's enabled us to do as a country is to be much more sophisticated and targeted in taking that aid that used to come from Europe, which we have fully honoured, and actually, I think, spread out in a much better way to specific areas that need it. I mean, we've seen many benefits here in North Shropshire in terms of community ownership funds and other funds as well.
So you're far more knowledgeable than this. Who's benefited the most out of the 20?
Well, I don't know which country, but I mean, for instance, Spain built its high-speed railways and its motorways. People talk about that, but that was built on EU money.
We're drifting a long way from market rate.
Yeah, fair enough.
Let's bring that part of the process to the close. And now, you've each got 2 minutes to summarise your view and encourage our voters to vote for you. And I'd be interested to know what your actual genuine ambition is for July the 5th, not July the 4th, but July the 5th. We'll start with you, Ron. A bit of my client.
Well, first of all, is to bring a better lifestyle to the farming community and to the people of Shropshire. This is where I've lived for 40 years. I've seen lots of problems within this town itself for 17 years, with a lot of help from fellow councillors, and with North Shropshire committee there, I've seen the problems of the rest of the county, whilst we're living with them. To put my word into Parliament to have things pushed through to help the communities would be, it's something you dream of, because when you first go on a council, this is where you want to be, the very, very chance of standing for Parliament. You never think you're ever going to get there, you never think you're ever going to get a chance. But when you do get that chance, you grab it with both hands and you go for it. You've got to help the local people. You've got to get the buses in there, you've got to get the hospitals built up, you've got to get the ambulance, you've got to get the whole system right now is just falling apart. You can just go through a list of everything you have around you and it's fallen apart from lack of investment and lack of care from two parties that have led this country for nearly 100 years, and it's just led down the path to robbery. And I'm bored with it, and I think nearly everybody else is. So vote for reform, and we'll do the things that these people are afraid to do. We're not bothered about being shouted at. We'll go forth and do it for you and help you.
Mark Whittle, thank you very much. Helen Morgan for Liberal Democrats.
Thank you very much. So, if I have the privilege of being re-elected on July the 4th, my ambition for July the 5th and the coming years will be the same as it's been for the last 2.5 years, to focus on the issues that matter most to people in North Shropshire, which are their health care, the cost of living, public transport and infrastructure issues, and to focus relentlessly on those and to push the government that is elected, and we don't know who that will be yet, to push the government that is elected to ensure that rural areas like ours are getting a fair deal, and that we don't go back to being taken for granted, and that we improve the lives of everybody in North Shropshire.
Thank you. Natalie Bradley.
Thank you. I hope from tonight you get a sense of the public service and duty I feel towards my community. I want people to be able to thrive and get on in life. It's a real privilege to be up here asking for your support and to be your Labour MP. Every great nation is held together by a shared belief. Britain is no different. But at this moment, two of our most important beliefs are in grave danger. First, that politics should be driven by a sense of service to the country and not to your party or self-interest. Second, that if you work hard, then whoever you are and wherever you started in life, Britain is a country that will respect your contribution and give you a fair chance to get on. That seems lost with the current government. North Shropshire voted for change in 2021 and we haven't got that, and we won't with the Lib Dem MP. We need solutions, not spam, policy instead of paddleboarding, boldness instead of buffoonery. If you want change, if you want a grown-up approach to governing, if you want to start rebuilding our country, then it's quite simple. You should vote Labour on the 4th of July. As your Labour MP, I will hopefully be at the heart of a new Labour government to help support and implement the change that families so desperately need in North Shropshire.
Thank you very much. Craig Emery for the Green Party.
So I suppose what would my plan be on the 5th of July if I wasn't successful? I'd go back to working hard for my local community, being a dad, working at the co-op and trying to make the community a much better place, because that's what Greens do and elected Greens. I think, you know, tonight you've heard from all the parties, and I think all the traditional parties, I think across the board, just haven't been brave enough. We've all acknowledged that climate change is happening, it's here, but we're just not going quick enough. That's my issue here. So a lot of the parties are going for infinite growth, on a planet that actually has finite resources. We've all acknowledged it, but no one is willing to do anything about it apart from the Green Party. I think we've been really honest with where we are as a country and where we need to be in the future. So I would just ask for your support on the 4th of July. Thank you.
Simon Baines, Conservative.
Thank you very much. The decision for the 4th of July lies in your hands, and I greatly respect that. And it's obviously up to you to decide which of us is elected to Parliament. I think that it reflects well upon the democracy in North Shropshire, that we've had a very sort of civilised discussion between us this evening, and we've got other hustings meetings coming up. But I've been struck by the goodwill that exists here between different parties, and I think that bodes very well for North Shropshire, regardless of what the outcome is. I've, in terms of my time as a candidate, I've really gone for 6 key areas, and I won't go into massive detail, you'll be relieved to hear, but they are upgrading doctors' surgeries and speeding up access to GP appointments, improving roads, fixing potholes, championing our farmers and food producers, delivering reliable bus and train services, backing our local businesses, and improving mobile phone signal and broadband speeds across the county. Those are 6 of the specific issues, but I think that overall, being an MP is about service, as many of my colleagues here have said, and it's really about representing what you want and dealing with all the concerns and troubles that you have. That's an incredibly important part of an MP. And having been an MP and having, because the seat was dissolved, moved over here, the thing that people say to you at the end of your time as the MP, they remember what you've done for them. They remember how you've helped them with specific problems. And for me, that's the most important thing, the sense of public service to you, the people of North Shropshire.
Thank you. Well, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you for coming and contributing to a civilised evening. None of us is being paid, but the venue does have to be paid for. I believe we kindly got the mates rates, but nevertheless, donations would be gratefully received on the way out. And finally, I and the candidates all say thank you very much and good night.
I just wanted to add a word to that very quickly on behalf of the 2 groups who organised this hustings, that's Market Drayton Climate Action and Market Drayton Community Enterprise, to reiterate that thank you to all the candidates for coming here to the heart of our community, taking part in this hustings. To add to that, a big thanks to Chris Eldon Lee for chairing this meeting so well, and ask you to put your hands together again. Thank you very much.